Hello, welcome to the bee vlog. So today is harvest day. Finally, about a year in the making. You know, when I first started beekeeping, and still today when people find out I'm a beekeeper, the number one question I get is, where's the honey? And most people are often disappointed to find out how long it takes to actually get the honey. So this hive here was a swarm that I caught last year in June. So I've had them for just over a year now, and they're finally big enough to harvest some honey. This one here was a cutout I did earlier this year from an RV. They were pretty big to begin with, so they already had a good start coming into the spring. And they actually, I just took weights, and even though they're one box smaller, they actually weigh the same. So I'm going to see how much honey's in here that I can take from them as well. So maybe I can get a good harvest from these two hives. So we'll see how it goes. So the way I'm going to do this harvest is I'm just going to pick one frame at a time out of here, sweep the bees off, and look for the frames that I like. What I'm going to be looking for first is comb that's a virgin wax with honey capped. The virgin wax is whiter. That means that the queen has never laid eggs in it, and it's never raised brood, so it doesn't have that darker color. It doesn't have the cocoons that the bees develop as they're growing from larvae. When I've done some cutouts and harvested that honey, it was honey that was in brood comb, and I didn't like the taste of it. And I don't know if it's just because of the locations they were in and the cutouts, or if it's just the way that it tastes when it comes out of brood comb. But I'm gonna harvest a couple frames that had brood in it, just to see if it's a situation of brood comb or cutouts. And we have some crazy cross comb in here that looks quite messy. I'm going to have to clean up a little bit. So there's that cross comb that was going on. I actually started building it out sideways from the other stuff, and this is all empty. I don't see any eggs or nectar, it's just empty wax. So that's a frame I'll need to fix. So this side of the frame is capped, but the other side isn't. You see the difference here. These are open cells of honey. So this is not ready to harvest yet. That is going to get left inside. So here's a good frame of capped honey. This looks like darker honey. I don't know if it's the honey that's darker here or if this is old brood comb. But I'm going to harvest this one and see what it's like. So I like using the feathers to sweep the bees. I used to use a bee brush, but they just get tangled up in the bristles and get angry. The feather doesn't bother them as much. I feel a little vulnerable having a short sleeve shirt and having my arm up in the air here. But so far so good.
Do you want a long sleeve shirt?
That's alright. Get her little butt sticking out there.
Yeah, she won't come out.
No. So our main nectar flow is over now. This hive has not put on any weight in the past 3 months, or three weeks. They started out at 179 pounds 3 weeks ago, and today they're weighing 176 pounds. So they've actually lost a few pounds. I imagine that's mostly bee weight. They seem to be shrinking a bit. There's this one bee that's, well, there she comes. Now she's out. Go join your sisters. Okay. And what we're doing is I'm just putting them in an empty hive body.
There's one on the very bottom.
Better cover it before that gets in there. So I'm just putting the frames in an empty hive body and covering it up with a lid. Now this is a nice, pretty frame of virgin wax and capped honey.
That's pretty. I gotta take a picture of that before we process it at home. I use mist ones. Yeah. The top on the other side.
Another frame of dark honey. This one is the same color as that first frame. These are two frames that were foraged by the bees last fall. So this may just be darker fall honey. I was moving them up into the supers. Each time I'd add another box, I'd bring these frames up because to attract the bees up into the box. Now there's a little bit of uncapped honey here, but I think that I've got enough capped honey here that that little bit won't matter. This frame, they started to turn the honey. Now the comb is going off crooked a little bit. You can see there, and it was attached to the next frame over. So I'm just going to push that. I'm going to cut it here, and I'm going to push it over it back to center it up in the frame. Same thing down here at this end. So we got 5 frames of honey out of the first hive. We saw more honey in there, but it wasn't capped yet, so it's not ready to harvest. So maybe later in the season, depending on their weights, I may come back and do a second harvest in the fall if they still have enough honey. Otherwise, I may just start reducing things down in the fall, taking out some old brood frames that may not be used anymore, and so on, to try to reduce their space, because they're not going to need all 4 boxes through the winter. Now I'm going to see in Queen Flora here to see how much honey they've got and see if I can steal a few frames. We've already smoked them. So. Both of these hives, I was trying out this top entrance on. They weren't really using the entrance, as an entrance. They were just guarding it, but it was made for a nice vent. It's actually, it seemed to be getting cooler weather going into August, so I'm going to be taking these top entrances off here. Actually propolised up the entrance pretty good. Yeah, we got some here. A nice looking comb and honey. These are beautiful. So we'll probably get 2, maybe 3 frames out of this one.
Done?
No, there's some uncapped over here that they're digging at. one inside here.
I'll deal with her, so I
Fish her out. Here she comes.
trying to keep them off of this side.
Okay. Alright. So we got 2 frames of honey out of this hive. The rest of it that is honey is not capped yet. And they're still raising brood up here. So I don't think I'm going to get much more out of them at this point in the season. I'll check again later in the season and maybe see if some of this additional honey is capped. So the next stage is taking it home and crushing it and straining it. So we'll show you that next. Well, welcome to my kitchen. So this is the setup I'm going to be using. I picked up a couple 5-gallon buckets. One of them I drilled a whole bunch of little holes in the bottom. These are about 3/8 of an inch, although a little bit smaller because my 3/8 inch drill bit was dull. And this is a bucket with a honey gate on it. So the first thing I did was make sure everything is clean. So I scrubbed it all down with soapy water and make sure that the honey gate is closed tight so you don't get drips. Now there are tons of YouTube videos on how to do this crush and strain method. In fact, that's pretty much where I learned to do this. But basically, all you do is crush up the comb, put it into the bucket that has the holes on it, and then using a fine mesh bag. I think this might be a paint straining bag, but I picked it up at the bee supply store specifically for this, so I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I've heard you can use a paint straining bag. Then one of the bucket lids gets cut a hole big enough so that when you put the bucket that has the holes on top, the ring basically holds that bucket up and doesn't get in the way of all the holes. So the order in which everything gets assembled is your bucket without the holes, one at the honey gate goes on the bottom, the paint strainer goes inside of that. I'm going to lift it as high as I can to get so that the bottom of the bag doesn't just sit in the honey. So it sits up pretty high up here. And once that's in place, put the lid on. It doesn't have to be on tight, it just needs to sit on there. And then the straining bucket goes on top of that. And then all of the mushed up comb and honey will go inside of here. I'm going to set this on the floor so that it's easier to work with. I have another smaller setup that I'm going to demonstrate. I've actually done this method before to just harvest a single frame. I can usually get about 1.5 quarts of honey out of one frame. So what I do is I take the jar and set it in a pitcher, and I have a small kitchen strainer that fits inside the pitcher. Set that on top. And then I have a small bucket, and this was actually an old feeder, and drilled a few holes on the bottom of that. Not too many here because I want to have the honey kind of centered so it doesn't drip all over the outside of the jar. I just want it to drip down into the middle of the jar. And then that would sit on top of the strainer. And you can fit one frame of crushed up wax and honey in that feeder, in this small bucket. And that works for just one frame at a time if you just want to do a small scale type of harvest. So some of the frames in here have a different color of honey, and I want to harvest them separately so I don't mix them with the other colors to see if they have a different flavor or different quality to them. So I'm going to be doing both methods this time. most important part to me. Taste test. Delicious. Now, if you're not a beekeeper, or you're a first-time beekeeper, and you're not familiar with the structure of the comb here, let me zoom in here. So once the honey is ripened, the bees put a coating of wax, called a capping, over the top of the honey. And it's basically just a little lid that can be pulled off, scraped off, or the bees chew it off. When those who use foundation want to extract honey and they use a centrifugal extractor, they actually just cut the cappings off the surface here using a knife, and then you can put it in the centrifugal extractor and spin it, and all the honey gets spun out of the cells. This option, instead of spinning it out, since there's no structure to the comb that can hold it in a spinner without kind of blowing the comb out, I have to crush and strain it. It's also, small scale, easier to do. Foundation usually has either a plastic core or wires inside it to help support it. It's important to get everything mashed up. You can't leave any cells intact or you can't get the honey. So you're basically making a honey wax mush. Okay. Then you just let it sit. Then I repeat that process with all of the frames until this is, as full as I'm going to get it. Let it sit overnight. Let it just drip in. This does actually work. The wax separates from the honey. Now here's one of those frames that has really dark honey. And I'm not sure if it's the honey that's dark or the comb that's dark in this case. I'm not sure if video is even doing justice to it, but here's for comparison. Here's another frame of really light honey. I don't know if you can even see the difference in video, but there's a side-by-side comparison. So the first thing I'm going to do here is taste test it to see what this tastes like. And I'm looking, there's a few empty combs in here. There are a few empty cells. And it looks like it's some dark comb. Now it's not really old comb. This hive is only a year old. But it may have once had brood in it. And as I said earlier, I harvested some honey from some cutouts I did earlier in the spring. And I did not like the taste of that honey. I call it stinky honey. Well, this has a different taste to it. It's not quite as bad as that stinky honey from the cutouts, but it has that little bit of a flavor to it. But it's not unbearable. Let me try some more here. Yeah, it's good. It's good. It is tasty. So I'm going to harvest this using the other method, the one at a time, so I can maintain this flavor separate, because it does have a different flavor to it. It's a little bit richer. So I'm going to keep this separate from the other lighter honey. This comb definitely used to have brood in it. As I'm crushing it up, I can see the old cocoons here. You can see how dark they are. That's the cocoons that the bees leave behind in the wax. And it's harder to crush too. A little bit stiffer comb. But I keep tasting it just to double check here. Just to make sure that it is something I still like. And yeah, it's good. There's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't have that stinkiness that the honey I got out of the cutouts has. And it may be because that honey came from another source, from some kind of stinky flowers, or maybe the brood comb was so old it just had a stronger flavor to it. So I actually got about 1.5 frames of comb into that small strainer. You can see the rest of the frame that I couldn't fit in there sitting in the bowl still. I'll wait until this drains down some more before I add it in. But you can see, if I peek inside here, you can see the progress dripping down in there. It drips very slowly, but I've got this jar about 1/3 full, and it's probably been going for about an hour. So by tomorrow it will be finished. Of course, I'll have to change the jar out partway through or it's going to overflow. And the progress here in the big buckets, see the top bits of comb or wax are starting to dry as the honey level gets lower and lower. So let's take a peek under the bucket here. We can see down in the mesh strainer it's catching that. Now this strainer, really its purpose is not to completely filter it, but just to strain out little bits that get past the big holes. Things like little pieces of wax or bits of bees. So if you're interested in having pollen still in your honey, you still have that. It doesn't completely filter it out. So I have a couple frames left over here that have some beautiful virgin comb, and I'm going to make some cut comb with this. So I have these Glad storage containers that I'm going to use to cut off some big squares of it and stick them in here with a lid. Then I'll have some delicious cut comb. There we have it. Perfect size for one medium frame. You get 3 storage containers loaded up